Market Prospects, delivering timely information and education to prairie farmers for over 30 years. Market Prospects is brought to you by the University of Saskatchewan's Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics and these sponsors. Log on to marketprospects.usask.ca to view past programs and for information on upcoming programs.
Pulse crops have been providing excellent returns for prairie farmers. This week on Market Prospects, we focus on the outlook for peas and beans. Joining us from Winnipeg is Chuck Penner, founder of LeftField Commodity Research. Mr. Penner, it's again a pleasure to have you on Farmgate.
Good to be here.
So let's start with a review of prairie field pea production and the current global market conditions. Then please comment on the movement, prices, and ending stocks for the remainder of this crop year.
Well, we started off the year with extremely dry conditions, and we thought we were going to actually lose the pea crop. It came around a little bit with some rain in July, and we got a decent crop, but it was down on the year before. And both yellow and green pea production were down, and so we ended up with a crop of somewhere around 3.2 million tons. StatsCan just recently added about 400,000 tons from last year's S&D, and so that's caused a bit of a bulge in supplies, but really nothing to worry about. So what's been happening globally is that India has really been driving the demand, especially for yellow peas. Their own crops have been short. They've had two short winter crops and a short summer crop as well too. And so they've just been buying large volumes. And so we had a very, very heavy movement in fall. Again, especially for yellows. Greens haven't quite followed to the same degree, and greens typically have a premium over yellows. This year that's flipped around with some yellow pea bids exceptionally high. And so for ending stocks, it looks like it's not going to be quite as tight as we thought it was earlier, but most of those are going to be greens, and the ending stocks for yellows will be exceptionally tight by the end of 2015-16.
So what's your forecast for Canadian acreage and prices for yellow and green peas for the upcoming crop year?
Well, I'm looking at a fairly sizable increase. Some people have talked about very large increases, but they're actually competing with lentils for acres. And so I'm putting 2016 acres at 4.2 million. That's up about 14% over last year. And I think what's going to happen is that people who have grown green peas are going to get discouraged. So we see acreage there drop about 8%. And the yellows may actually gain about 20%. And most of that growth happening in Alberta, northern Saskatchewan, maybe even a little bit in Manitoba. When we look at prices for next year, right now we have some yellow pea bids up around $13 or $14 a bushel for spot delivery. Those are certainly going to come down, but I think we're going to see some historically strong prices for yellows. Over the long-term average, probably $6 to $7 is normal. I think we're probably going to do a couple of dollars better than that. So, you know, anywhere in that $8 to $10 range is likely. For greens, I think we're still going to be suffering a bit of a hangover from heavy supplies, and so they'll probably trail yellows again in 2016-17, and so that's a bit of an unusual situation.
So what are the production opportunities from some of the minor types of peas in the coming year?
Well, there aren't a whole lot of bids for some of the marrow fats and maple peas and those types of things, but they do have to compete with yellow peas for acres. And so when yellow pea new crop bids are $9 to $10 a bushel, some of those specialty ones will need to compete with that. So that's what we're seeing on maples. I haven't seen marrow fat bids, but for maple peas in that $9 range, and so there's lots of opportunities. It's hard to justify paying higher prices for those.
So what's been happening with prairie faba bean and soybean production and markets, and what is your forecast for acreage and prices for the 2016-2017 crop year?
Well, faba beans went through this huge boom cycle a couple of years ago, and we really capitalized on poor production in Australia, in the UK, and in France. Those are the typical export competitors. And so we saw a bit of a opportunity there, whereas just in the past year we had large acres again, but those export opportunities weren't there. And so the market has kind of been more confined to domestic production, or domestic consumption, I should say. And so it's, I think we'll see probably about flat acres again next year. So that boom seems to be over. When I look at bids for next year, there really aren't, again, many out there. I would guess that somewhere in that $6 to $7 a bushel range would be normal for faba beans. For soybeans, it's really subject to the global market, and so what we have there is we have large South American crops, more production looks like going to be happening in a number of countries, and so I think it's going to be a struggle to get anywhere close to the $10 a bushel range that we have now for spot bids.
Can you see soybean acreage expanding in Saskatchewan at all?
Oh, I think they will. I think people will put in more soybeans. You know, if they can at all avoid some of the other cereal grains that aren't showing as good returns. The difficulty is that they will be competing against things in southern Saskatchewan anyway, things like lentils and peas more in northern Saskatchewan, and so it'll be modest growth. I don't think we'll see the same boom that we have in the past.
Well, valuable information. Thanks again, Mr. Penner.
You're very welcome, Bob.
Farmgate will return after a few messages.